everyone, welcome back to our Stash Dive knit along. I hope you've all been making lots of progress on your sweater, and most importantly that you've been having a lot of fun, because it does not very often you get a chance to play with yarn and experiment in a little bit more of a relaxed way, so that it's a fun thing to knit with your stash. Because sometimes we get so focused on the end product that we forget that it can be a lot of fun, that we're actually playing with textures and colors and combinations and gauge. So, have fun with it and don't be afraid to pull stuff out or experiment. And if the experiment doesn't work out, just pull it out. So I'm going to show you what I've done so far. I have one thing I should probably say as well is, like, I've been trying to keep, I had a rough guide as to how many inches in each color I was going to do and how many inches for each combination. But what I'm discovering a little bit is that, particularly as you need to get to the end of a right or wrong side row, sometimes it's changed a little, and I think I've probably ended up with my armhole depth slightly deeper than expected, but it doesn't really matter. Now, it's the same thing with the front and back. Try your best to keep the colors on your back or your front section similar to the back. But if they don't match up exactly, or if you run short of yarn, it really doesn't matter. It's more if you want to have it all lined up. Keep an eye on it. If you don't care, then just leave it be. So here, this is what I have so far. I've left the stitches here on this needle because I've got a couple of extra needles, so that way I can leave it on my yarn holder. So I'll stick it under here and show you. I've started at the very top here with my first color. It was about 1 inch of that, and then I went on to 1 inch of combining with the texture here. Of course, there's the short rows as well. You can see the middle of that is a little bit deeper. But it looks a little strange simply because of the fact that it's going to roll. I haven't blocked it yet. So I did 2 inches of the first color, then 1 more inch of the texture, and then I started into just alternating between the 2 colors. This is the one where I found that I went a little bit longer than expected. And then I did 1 inch of that and just got started on this texture and realized that I had well got to the length I needed. I was kind of having too much fun with combining the colors. So I broke the yarns, left it where it was. Now, you can see here what I did as well, that you should make sure that you do if you haven't gotten started with yet. Let me find it. Here we go. I put a marker where I had the edge of the shoulder stitches where I start, the one I used for my short rows, because that's where you're going to be picking up the shoulder. So this is your back. This is my right section here. And over here, this was my left section. So now, if you've gone and you've done a sweater before, if you've done the back section, you've just got the short rows to shape. And then the front, it gets a little bit more complex because you want to have a curve around where the front of the neck is. Now, I'm working with assuming that I'm just going to do a kind of a crew neck or circular neck with just a slight dip. But that's one place where you can go and experiment yourself, because if you wanted to do, say, a V-neck, all you're going to start doing is either every right side row or maybe every second right side row, you'll just do an increase at the edge of the neck and it'll create a V-neck. If you end up with the V-neck being a little bit too deep for your liking, what you can do after the fact is just pick up stitches around the edge, which we're going to do for the edging anyway, but you can just work slightly more edging as you go. So make it a little deeper and make some increases as you go. So don't worry too much about the neck being a little bit too open, because you can sort it out afterwards with those neck edging. But what we do want to look at is we want to figure out how you're going to do the shaping for your neck now. So let's take a look over here at this particular graph. What I did was I printed out just knitted graph paper, and you can see at the top here, I've counted out 60 stitches for the width of my neck. And each of those squares is like a stitch. And I'm going to take roughly around 1/3, so like around 20 stitches in the middle that are going to be straight, which will be the cast on section. And then all I did was just draw a curve in. So if you print this out for yourself, count out the size of the neck that you've got, and then take round about a third. I mean, you can make it a little wider if you want to, because if you make this wider, you won't have as much curve, which will make a shallower neck. So if you want your neck shallower, then you probably want this section wider. So I did a rough little sketch up here. Then the next thing I did is I went and I started putting stair steps in. And what those stair steps are is you're taking that curve and you're approximating it to those stitches. So this one here is, you can see I'm going for 2 rows, doing 1 increase. So that's the same as just having an increase on a right side row. 2 rows, another increase. And so initially, to keep it much steeper this way, I'm going much further, as in every 2 rows or every right side row, and then I'm doing an increase. So that's how that big initial stair step goes. Now we're moving on to a kind of flatter curve here, where you're doing increases much more rapidly, which starts bringing it around here. So what that means is I'm going to have an increase every right side and every wrong side row. So you can change the shape of your neck by changing how this works. So if you want a much slower increase, which means that it's going to also be deeper because it'll take further, then you'll do more of these increases every right side row and less every right and wrong side row. If you want it flatter, you can also go and make more cast on stitches in the middle, which will mean that you only want your neck to curve a shorter space here. So there's all sorts of things you can do to change that. Now, when we're looking at these, this is the neck opening here. This is the right shoulder on this, your left shoulder, sorry. And this is the right shoulder over here. I'm going to start off by picking up those left shoulder stitches and doing these increases. And that's what I'm going to show you here. And then what you will do afterwards is you're going to then pick up the right shoulder and you'll do the increases along this side. When you reach this depth, you'll have all those right shoulder stitches across here. You'll cast on these stitches, and then these stitches that you've already done, you'll knit across here. And at that point, you'll have the full set of stitches across the front that's going to look exactly the same as the back. So that gives you kind of an idea of how you can mix the whole thing up and change the shape of your neck a little bit. So you can kind of see here, what I've done is I've got 9 right side increases, 10 right side and wrong side increases. So it's 10 altogether. So it'll be 5 on the right side and 5 on the wrong side, and then 22 that are cast on across. You should go ahead and decide your own shape on graph paper before you start doing that. So then the next thing we're going to do that I can show you here is I've picked up all of those stitches across the left side. And then we're going to go, and before we do anything else, let me show you here. So I've picked up the stitches, and I've also worked a wrong side row, because once you've picked up stitches, you're going to end up over here. So you'll work that wrong side row over to here. And then the same as before, we're going to work your short rows. So I'll just do the very first one again here. So same as the very back. Hang on, this is loose here. What I'm going to do here is tighten this up and just anchor that yarn down for myself here so it's not loose. There we go. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Turn my work. Do my German short row. Slip it, pull it over, and then go on to purl. So that is how you get started with the short rows on the left side. And so what you would do now is just keep going, adding 1 extra until we get to the end, the very same as you did for the back. So that's going to be the left front. Now, pretend that we've worked that far. You can, if you want, work a little bit further before you start working the neck increases. But I think I'm going to just pretend they're all done and show you how you're going to work those left ones here. So I'm going to use a make 1 increase. So the make one, they can either be right leaning or left leaning. And I'm going to make left leaning over on this side and right leaning on this side. So the left leaning, you don't do it right on the edge because you want to kind of have it in a little bit. Usually do 2 stitches, but you could do further if you wanted. It'll make it very obvious what you're doing with your work there, because it gives a very nice line. So to make it from the left side, you pick the bar up between the stitches here and knit into the back of it. And then you work all the way back across here. When you are doing it on the wrong side, you're going to be working across to this point, and you would work to the last 2 stitches. And you'll do it the same way, pick up the bar from the front, and then instead of knitting it, you would purl it. So that's all you're going to be doing across here till you reach the length of stitches you want. When that side's done, you'll break your yarn and you'll do the same thing on this side. But the difference being, because it's on the right side, all of your increases are going to be on this side now. And instead of coming from the front for your make one left, you'll come from the back. Now, you can take a look in the work on the blog, and it'll show you, it's got a link for the make one left to make one right if you haven't used those before. So go ahead and take a look at those tutorials if they're new to you. And there's also a link for the cable cast on that I use for across the front. The reason I use the cable cast on is I find the cable cast on is nice and durable and gives a really firm edging, which is what you want at the front of your neck. So however, when you're working the cable cast on, it works this way. So if you've got your right stitches worked, to be able to continue across the front, you have to turn to the wrong side of the work and then do your cast on, and then you turn to the right side of the work, and then you can pick up the left side. So I'm hoping that by the end of next week that I will have finished the front of the work. And then that is really the most complicated part you've got. After that, you're going to join in the round, and all you're focusing on then is kind of looking at the color combinations. And I'll show you how to do helical stripes, which is a great way of alternating colors when you're doing those color alternations in the middle. And it sounds like a really complex technique, but you'll discover it's one of the simplest things you'll do. So please go ahead and share all of your work on social media, on Instagram or on Twitter or Facebook. Use Carol Feller Stash Knit Along, so Carol Feller Stash KAL, and that way I'll see them all and I get to share them out with the rest of the world. You might take a look at some of them that are up there right now too, because there's a couple of really fun little projects that are up with all sorts of interesting stitch patterns and things being done on it. So that's it for today. Come along next week and we'll be onto the body.